My name is Keith Henry. I'm the President and CEO for the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada. My story of tourism is I sort of fell into this industry. I was first brought on as an advisor. I was in Indigenous economic development in British Columbia in 2000 and roughly 4 or 5. And at that time, the organization was called Aboriginal Tourism BC. Aboriginal Tourism BC was one of the only provinces advancing Aboriginal tourism, as it was known in the mid-2000s. And it was they wanted to have another representative on their advisory committee. So I was invited to be part of the Aboriginal Tourism Advisory Committee for what was known as the Blueprint Strategy for British Columbia, which was a multi-year strategy to build, at that time, Aboriginal tourism leading up to the 2010 Winter Games, was part of the objectives. So I started to attend these committees on a very regular basis. I thought it was a lot of the volunteerism was it was a lot of work expected of us. But I quickly realized how incredibly powerful Aboriginal tourism was. It completely changed my outlook. I wasn't trained in tourism. My degree's in education, and then I became a financial administrator of Indigenous organizations. I'd run a number of nonprofits, and I was very much prided myself on being more of a sort of a policy negotiator. And so, but I loved what I saw. It was one of the times I went, wow, we can actually do a job where we can actually do cultural revitalization and do cultural sustainability in a way that brings new money into our communities and for entrepreneurs. Like, that was just at that time, that was a very new concept for us. And so I loved it, and so I started on that advisory committee for a few years, and then they were having trouble within Aboriginal Tourism BC in terms of some administrative pieces, and so they asked me to take on a role of CEO. I took it on in 2008, and I've never really looked back. So I've been doing this now for a lot of years. It's hard for me to say there's been one moment where it was my most proud, because I feel like it was a set of stairs is the metaphor I'd use. Just when I thought that would be the proudest moment, then there was another one. And then when I thought that would be my proudest moment, there was another one. And in 2010, it was actually when we launched our programming for the Winter Olympics in Vancouver. We had an opening ceremony, and I think there was about 1,000 to 1,500 delegates showed up, and partners from all over the world wanted to know about Aboriginal tourism. We held it at the Pan Pacific in Vancouver, and I remember sitting there going, I had to speak as the CEO, and everyone was just clamoring to be a part of Aboriginal tourism and enjoy it while they were there, and how do their organizations get involved. And I just remember at that time going, wow, I never believed how incredibly powerful it'd be. So that was definitely up there. But then recently, we've been doing this work in Canada for a long time, and I moved to the national role in 2015, and I've been leading the national organization for basically the last decade, helping rebuild it, put it together, strategies. But then we were in New Zealand just this last year, and we were talking about the work we're doing in Canada, and it was to a delegation of Maori tourism operators. And I've come to work alongside Maori tourism many, many times in the last 10 years. And we've become friends and family, and we really look out to help each other. And it's like that with a number of countries. But at this particular conference, we had this moment when myself and Panya, their CEO for Maori tourism, and Sherry from the American Indian and Alaska Native Tourism Association, we presented this concept of the destination original Indigenous tourism to the Maori tourism delegates. Sherry, Panya, and I, and some of our key team members, we're so committed to this. We don't take a moment to enjoy the accomplishments of this. We finished the presentation at the end. The entire room stood up, clapped, and they broke into a haka, like a complete traditional, like not what I expected. Like I've seen it with the rugby and the world events on TV. But to have a room of about 500 to 600 people doing a haka, like it brought me to tears. And so I think about that, and I think about those moments, and I go, I don't know how to. They're both amazing. And I will say one third one. My work in Canada was recognized with the work I've been doing with Aboriginal tourism, or Indigenous tourism now today. Um, 2 years ago, I was provided my honorary doctorate of laws from the University of Guelph, and it was specifically for my leadership work in Indigenous tourism. And I got to present. I had to speak to all the graduates at that particular convocation activity. I didn't realize all the sort of formality around the actual convocating of that particular honorary doctorate. But it was hard for me to get through the speech. I was very emotional because it's been such a labor of love, and it's not about money. It's about knowing what my family went through, and then as I was speaking, I was like sharing about. I was trying to explain to this audience, most of which were just graduates from several thousand graduates from several different colleges, wondering who's this individual. I had to bring us together for 15 minutes to try and explain how much I appreciated, even though they didn't know me, how much I appreciated just them being witness to that event from my life. So I was really, that was definitely, so I'm sorry to go with three or more than one, but I really feel that each of them, and there's many other, what I would call sort of secondary times, but those three times, they were life-changing, and I'll, like, when I leave this earth, those will be memories I take with me that I'll never forget. I think that some of my most challenging moments are when I see it's difficult for our Indigenous tourism networks to really work together all the time. I've had moments where I've watched our different Indigenous tourism industry partners almost fight and conflict with each other, including us. And I understand where they're coming from, because in the Indigenous tourism world, if you're from a business perspective or you're from an Indigenous tourism association, the reality is, despite all these public political perceptions, there's all these millions being poured in. What people don't realize, the economy scale of that is so minuscule compared to the vast, like, we're dealing with thousands of businesses, we're dealing with, Indigenous tourism organizations at a national level, and then you have the provincial territorial bodies. When you distill those resources down, it's very modest. It's an environment of scarcity. It's an environment of where we're made to feel like we need to fight each other to get ahead, because if a dollar goes here, then we're going to lose it over here. And part of me is empathetic to the different provincial territorial bodies, because I know they need to survive. They need to stabilize. But I think oftentimes it's so challenging when I see it happening, and I see us lose Indigenous people and jobs that we just couldn't keep them for. And we lose great marketers, and these are all mostly like, we've worked so hard to train so many really highly skilled, amazing Indigenous marketers and product development people and Indigenous tourism organizations that are actually just been gutted time, and like it's hard because we're the fourth iteration of a national body. Canada has never stabilized the investments for Indigenous tourism, despite all the success. It's been a labor of love by people that are very committed, because it's unpredictable, it's unstable. And that's why I'm so passionate about the work I do, because the day we fix that is the day I can retire. Because that's what I'm setting out to. I want to make sure that we have a strong national body, we have strong provincial and territorial bodies, and they're bringing good marketing tools down to show authentic Indigenous experiences and destinations and so forth. So dealing with that, dealing outward with policy people and governments, that doesn't bother me, because I expect that. I've been doing this for a lot of years, not just in tourism, but other work in my life. I've been a Métis leader in my own community for many, many years. Lots of attacks, you name it. But when we attack each other on the inside, the lateral violence, that's so hard for me. And we've had some difficult times, and it's a cycle. It'll come back because governments panic. They see there's fighting, and then they'll put a little bit of money in, and they'll keep us all happy for a little longer. But that's not sustainable, and that's my goal, is to see how we can get through that. So we'll get through it, but you have to just try and weather those situations as professionally and respectfully as you can, because the people that are attacking or getting mad, they're coming from a place that they don't want to lose their jobs. They don't want to see everything they've been working for gone too. So I get it. I understand. Yeah, I think our vision of the original is really to be the one national brand that we can bring, particularly to export markets, that we can help, whether it's visitors from the US, UK, France, Germany, if we get into the Asian markets with Japan, hopefully one day China comes back, because that was a good market for us. Korean markets are have a lot of potential. The point is we're trying to help the world have just a general understanding of this is, when you see this one brand, it's the original. Now, where I see these other brands at a more provincial or territorial regional level, to me that is great. We just need to figure out one simplified brand that we can accredit and support our businesses obtain should they want to. And then you can have these other sub-regional brands where you're looking at more of the local domestic markets, maybe the North American market, but just that they're complementary to the original brand. And as they develop those brands, our hope is, because we see different brands in different provinces, we hope that they'll align the same sort of mechanisms and structures that we've put together with an actual accreditation behind the original. Often what I see in Canada right now, there's some great branding at the provincial and territorial or local or regional level, but there's no real accreditation program behind it. And so we're trying to diplomatically say, look, that's great, and let's keep that more for the local markets. But when we go to the international, it's here, and then let's try and find a way we can bridge these through some sort of accreditation sub-program of some sort. And then at least we're all working towards the same outcomes. I think I would suggest to anyone in the Atlantic region or the 4 provinces is to take a little solace in not feeling like you're too far behind places like Quebec and Ontario. Quebec and Ontario got to where they were in terms of being leaders or perceived leaders in Indigenous tourism because in each of those provinces, the province of Quebec and the province of British Columbia made strategic investments in tourism. Like, it's been there since basically the mid to late 90s in both those provinces. So they've been investing and developing, like I said, in British Columbia when I was there on the committee, Aboriginal tourism, and now it's evolved to Indigenous tourism. They've been doing that since about 96 in BC, and in Quebec it was 94. So there's been more support, more interest in it. It's filtered from a policy perspective down to all the communities in those provinces. In Atlantic Canada, I remember coming here in 2015, 2016, 2017, and just really continuing to try and rally industry support and garner more Indigenous attention to the importance of Indigenous tourism. There was tourism here already, but what you see in British Columbia and Quebec is not only do they have Aboriginal or Indigenous tourism now today, they have coordination, and what Atlantic Canada needs is coordinating bodies. What we also need in Atlantic Canada, on the coordination side, whether it's INSITN, like Nova Scotia Indigenous Tourism Enterprise Network, or Indigenous Tourism Association PEI, or Indigenous Tourism Association New Brunswick, or Newfoundland Labrador Indigenous Tourism Association. Those bodies need to be capacitated and built to actually be stable so they can coordinate marketing and development at a more local community entrepreneurial level. And then once they come through those systems, then ITAC, when their Export Ready's division is, we will just help bring them now to the international side. That's what we're trying to get to. So those 4 provinces have to do the provincial governments need to take a serious look at how they're investing, because each of those provinces are very minimal in what they're actually putting in Indigenous tourism. In fact, some of the provinces put nothing directly into those organizations or into the marketing and development, unless it's through their own destination marketing organizations. And that to us it's not the Indigenous-led strategy. So we just need to remember that we're not too far behind in terms of there's a lot of businesses that are in Atlantic Canada, but we have to find a way to coordinate and really be strategic with marketing campaigns and continue to help everyone here realize what the potential market is. Like, it's not just local, because a lot of the Atlantic Canada Indigenous tourism right now has been more domestic visitors. And the truth is there could be a lot more international visitors, but we've got to get more packaging, more product development, more export readiness. Those are things that have to be done in the coming years. Well, I think that I would say to anyone looking at developing or thinking about how they're going to support Indigenous tourism in Atlantic Canada generally, is the fact is that demand has never been higher, including here in Atlantic Canada. Everything we do should be based, I know there's politics and there's emotion and there's all these other things but I'm here to say that beyond that, the fact is there is an industry that has economic potential which will ensure that Indigenous cultures thrive and survive in Atlantic Canada. We have visitors that want to pay for that service. We don't need to go asking for money from government constantly in other fronts. What we can do is we can create an actual economy that it's sustainable, providing more jobs and more businesses for our communities. So the fact is in Atlantic Canada, and we've done surveying at ITAC on the interest, domestic interest in Atlantic Canada is very high, which is not what it was 10, 15 years ago. I know because we were doing surveying then. So I would say the surveying now, we've got roughly 3 out of 4 residents, including in Atlantic Canada, are interested in Indigenous product and Indigenous tourism experiences, but they don't know where to find it. So we have marketing gaps, we've got development gaps, we've got, so the fact is there's a whole world of opportunity that if we collectively can work together, work with and I don't want to mix politics with programming, work with the 4 Indigenous tourism organizations that are there to do that work, build them up, help them, empower them with investments to develop more businesses, more product, more ways to become more market ready. They become a feeder to the national process with ITAC. That's the way it'll be really the best way forward. And again, it's backstopped by the fact that there's paying customers that really want this. So I think it's time that we think about how do we actually empower those organizations to get on with the work that they need to get on with. The most significant piece of advice I would say to any youth from any of the Indigenous communities in the Atlantic region is that don't be misled that tourism is a summer job. Because everywhere I go, we hear that. When we were at the North American Indigenous Games in Halifax this last year, we had youth come by, we had an information booth, and people were, time and time again, we hear young people surprised that tourism wasn't just a summer job and I could make minimum wage. And that people like me or them in the future, there's marketing jobs, there's professional jobs in that area, there's IT jobs, there's financial management jobs, there's just general manager jobs, there's all sorts of other career ladder choices you can have in tourism. You might start on the front line, but the realm of options you have coming out of this is not just a one-size-fits-all for a front-end job. That is where we start. I started my first job in my life working at A&W. My second job was at Pizza Hut. I didn't stay there because that wasn't what I wanted, but it gave me some initial experience. So, and now today I've been a CEO for many Indigenous organizations. I went to university, I did the thing, but my point is that they just need to realize that tourism has got so much potential and power into the future, whether it's just a good paying job, a career path, and knowing that you don't have to leave your community and knowing that you can actually contribute back to cultural sustainability without having to feel like you're doing some goodwill gesture. It's just what is the best way that you can actually build your path. And I think that people underestimate the power of their culture right behind them. Well, I think there's a few reasons that governments should invest in Indigenous tourism. The first one is if they really care about expanding their economies, this is the way to do it. They put metrics in front of all the destination marketing organizations and all the non-Indigenous partners with expectations of certain, they often heads in beds with hotels or bums and seats on planes or just, whatever provincial assets they've got in parks and things like that. But they don't realize that we're not talking about recycling the same consumer. We're talking with more Indigenous experiences and destinations. We'll actually bring new visitors into their provinces. So I think they should understand the economic side of it. Secondarily, though, they have what I would call a moral responsibility around economic reconciliation. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission came out with 94 recommendations. Number 92 is around economic reconciliation. Now, if I look at the numbers of what we estimate Indigenous tourism in Atlantic Canada is, we know that it's basically less than about 2 to 3% of the actual revenues are filtering their way down to authentic Indigenous owned and operated businesses and artists. It's a very modest amount of money for the amount of money the entire region brings in. But yet we know demand is much higher than that. So they need to make themselves uncomfortable with the fact that if they keep doing the same system in the same way, they're going to get the same results. I would hope that they make this a policy priority, that if they really support reconciliation, as most Canadians want us to do collectively in this entire country, Those ministers and the governments that get elected need to show leadership. They need to just make this a priority. And yes, some of it is around the social agenda of TRC, but the reality is, if they do this right, it's going to help the rest of the industry, and they can't lose sight of that. And they have to have faith. It'll take a bit of the investments and some time to get there, but over time, we know that the consumer demand will bring them huge economic benefits, which is ultimately what they're probably most worried about. I think the GNU students, as they sort of, I use the word meander their way through their career thoughts and path and training, what I'd like to see them really learn is that ability to not be comfortable with status quo. You know, I'm in a leadership position where I'm in rooms all the time where people aren't always excited about what I have to say. It's not that I'm trying to be negative. I just want to challenge the systems that we need to rethink how we're doing tourism as a country. And we can be world leading. We at ITAC want to be the world leading Indigenous destination. But at the rate we're going right now, we're not going to get there by 2030. But if we challenge ourselves to say, let's really, instead of just doing the same thing over and over and over, because I actually thought when COVID hit us in 2020 and it lasted with us for a few years, there was a belief by many leaders in the industry that, oh, this will never be the same, things will change. But deep down, I didn't believe that. I thought the second it can go back to the way it was, everyone's going to go back to doing the exact same things. And that's exactly what's happened. So I want the GNU students to realize, be leaders, be well educated, know your subject matter, challenge yourself to just not accept status quo. And I know for many Indigenous people, and whether you're First Nation, Métis, or Inuit, we have this cultural norm where many of us don't really feel comfortable speaking up. They just sort of want to be comfortable just to get accepted. And they mentioned us. Oh, we're part of this. But ask yourself, part of what? Ask yourself, is this a real partnership, or are we still just a token gesture in the industry? Because I feel today that we need to move from tokenism to being an actual driver, one of the major drivers in which we can be in Atlantic Canada and Canada generally, but particularly Atlantic Canada, because there's a lot more potential European visitation that could be happening in these 4 provinces that won't happen because there's just a lack of readiness here and commitment to this vision. So yeah, it takes leadership, and it takes that ability, and the way you remove that nervousness is you just got to really be a master in the information. Well, I think the work we do to decolonize the tourism industry in Atlantic Canada is just making people aware of things like Indigenous-led strategy and Indigenous-led programs. We're not waiting for people to tell us what they're going to do for us. We're giving them the game plan. We're giving them the strategy. Whether they fully commit to our Indigenous-led accreditation programs, are they behind it? We've now created the Indigenous Tourism Destination Fund. We've given them simple, cost-effective ways to participate in these programs. We're making them aware that, do you have actually Indigenous members in your industry organization? Do you have Indigenous participation on your boards as DMOs? Do you have Indigenous metrics? I talk about this with DMOs behind closed door all the time. They have all these layers of public measurements of success, and I can't find a single one in this country that actually measures success as engagement or building Indigenous product or experiences in their destinations. Not one. And I think that we need to challenge the industry to do better. And I think those are the things that I really feel over time need to be addressed. And we need to think about how we measure success from an Indigenous perspective. So we're giving people, like I said, these simple tools and trying to build the relationships. And the last thing I'll say is, when I present across the country, I remind people in not so subtle of a way anymore. Like, they're quick to invite me there. They're quick to say, oh, come present to us. Because they want to feel good. They want to feel like they've done enough. But when we have our Indigenous industry tourism or sessions, how many non-Indigenous partners are there? Like, where are they all? Why aren't they there? Why aren't they in our rooms? So that whole value of partnership, there's many of us as as we've been around this industry for a while, we're trying to, again, gently but not so gently, just make sure people know that's expected. It's not, that's the new norm. Like, you need to be in our rooms, and I'll just end with this. Like, we've been with the Atlantic Canada, we've had now a number of Atlantic Indigenous Tourism Summits, and I have to say, the thing that troubles me the most is mostly our Indigenous businesses and our Indigenous network. There's not very many non-Indigenous industry partners sitting in that room. Where's Air Canada? Where's WestJet? Where's the major hotel brands? Where are their representatives? They all play a role in the industry, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to the brands. I'm saying I see all these major partners when I go to Tourism Industry Association networks everywhere else. Why do they not fundamentally value the place of Indigenous tourism in their DNA? And hopefully in time that'll change. I would just encourage people to look at corporate research and information. Go to indigenoustourism.ca. That's where we put all our plans, our reports, some of the visitor surveys we've done. Like, it's all there for public to view. If you're an Indigenous tourism business or you aspire to build a business, you can see how many export or more sophisticated market-ready businesses are at destinationindigenous.ca. That's our consumer platform, and you'll see some great examples of some of the most amazing world-class, authentic Indigenous tourism destinations we have in this country. And I would encourage people to become aware of what we're saying around investing in Indigenous tourism, and we've got www.itdf.indgenoustourisim.ca. That's our Indigenous Tourism Destination Fund. You can look there, you can look at the programming, the way the programs work, to see how we're trying to create industry sustainability. And finally, around things like the original programming, just go to the original.ca. All of these tools are there in the public to see clear ways that we can contribute to help people on the Indigenous side, have great research so they're making sound business decisions, try to help them to target their markets, and of course, and just see how we're working together with our Indigenous tourism partners across the country, including in Atlantic Canada. So great resources for everyone, and I hope people go explore Indigenous tourism. Igo igande ha igo gwandu dana he. Hey, igo igande he gwandu